So welcome everyone. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll get started with this webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join Brian and I. My name is Matt Bowles, Director of Professional Services at PinkELEPHANT. And Brian, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Brian Curry here, Senior Account Manager at PinkELEPHANT. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Look at that topic. That's a heavy-duty topic. Change management. And Matt, you know what I love about this picture?
What's that, Brian?
They're also happy because they have a good change management process in place.
That would be rare. That would be rare. I think one of the challenges is that many organizations are still struggling with this process in terms of how they're defining it, how it's being implemented and managed. And certainly from an improvement perspective, I think there's still a lot of opportunity that we can take to revisit what we're doing in change. And really that's what we want to try and address today. So we're going to look at a few areas, and then I'm going to turn things over to Brian. Brian's going to share with you some tools that PinkELEPHANT has that can help organizations to implement and improve their processes. And we'll get things going. So in terms of agenda today, we'll talk a little bit around the reason for good change management, talk about common challenges that organizations face with change, and I'm going to rely a little bit on some of our Pinkscan assessment data to talk about that in terms of common challenges that organizations are facing. And then we'll talk about some approaches that we have that may benefit you and your organization, making improvements or trying to apply some good practice in the change management space.
Sounds like a plan, Matt. And I will just reiterate, too, that it's very, very rare for me to have conversations with organizations who are embarking on some type of ITSM transformation where change management isn't a key process in scope. It seems to be a very vital process for being implemented and agreed upon and being documented and repeatable. You just want everybody to have that buy-in and understanding why it's necessary.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. So from an overview of change, and I'm not going to dive too deep into this, ITIL defines or describes the purpose of change management as the practice of controlling the life cycle of changes. So typically from a purist perspective, what we're trying to see is that from initial concept of a change, whether that's a small change on a server or an application, or a much larger service implementation, so applying a brand new service into the organization, we should be considering creating a change record at that time. So that initial concept is really where the start of that life cycle of the change should be initiated, and then it's managed throughout until it's either maybe it gets disapproved early on. That's not something that we're going to invest in. Or is that something that we're going to continue to work on, and ideally through implementation, we'll close out, review that change. So the purest intent of this process is to really manage the full life cycle of the change throughout an organization. And one of the key objectives, what I'd really like to emphasize is this last bullet here, which is optimize overall business risk. So when we go through the practice of managing changes, we want to be very aware of the level of risk that this change is going to have on an organization, because that helps to drive and helps to determine the level of authorization and who needs to be a part of the approval process to ensure that we're taking the appropriate steps to implement this change, ideally successfully, without minimizing any sort of impact to our business customers. we don't want to be in a situation where we're introducing bad stuff into our production environment. So we need to make sure that we're in tune with our key stakeholders, service owners, product owners. What is it that they have planned out in terms of longer-term changes versus more maintenance types of changes? So ensuring that we've got good communication internally from the change management perspective into those service and product areas to understand the types of changes, the volume of changes, and what that's going to look like in terms of scheduling. But really, we want to make sure that we understand the risk associated with each of these changes, the impact that it's going to create as it's being managed through deployment, and ensure that we're moving in the right direction with this process. It's absolutely a critical process to get right in your organization. And often we'll hear that it's a very bureaucratic process, that organizations struggle with it because of the bureaucracy, the CAB meetings, and ensuring that the reviews are taking place and the levels of approval. But if you implement the process effectively and you're using risk as a method of determining authorization and approval, you can minimize some of that bureaucracy by right-sizing the approval process and ensuring that we're minimizing the level of checks that have to go through to support each of the changes, so that we can see some acceleration and push through some higher volumes of change to support our business, which is ideally what we're trying to do. So we're not trying to stop change, we're trying to make sure that we're controlling the flow of it and ensuring that it's being effective and supporting the overall objectives of our organizations.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you can really relate to this, but I mean, I hear a lot of times, somebody's gone in and maybe changed some lines of code just on their own, kind of with that cowboy mentality, and what do you know, it causes a business outage, and that's when they're calling us. We typically get business that way. We need a proper change management process.
So talking about outages, these are a few fairly high-profile outages in the last few years with well-recognized organizations. And really, the last thing that you want is to be on the front page of a paper or being tweeted about due to an outage that's occurred within your organization. So depending on your brand, larger financial institutions, we've seen the online banking issues that have occurred. Often those issues are caused as a result of a change to a back-end system that's propagated out to that core service that's impacting external customers now. And that's not the type of exposure that we want our organizations to face. And even if you're a smaller organization or an organization that's not quite in the public eye, the credibility that you suffer as a result of those outages to your business really have a detrimental impact to how you're viewed by the business on a day-to-day basis. And you don't want your credibility challenged. So having a change process where you're being very communicative with the changes that are going out, understanding the impact of those changes to your business, and ensuring that the appropriate stakeholders are involved through the process. Again, you need to manage and temper this based on the risk of the change and the impact of that change in the organization. In terms of how much communication is required, how much communication is needed, and the involvement of business partners as well as other IT stakeholders in the review and validation of that change. But it's important to understand that change does cause outages in organizations. And we may not get to a situation where we eliminate any exposure of incidents from a change, but we certainly want to have a better understanding of that relationship and try to minimize the duration of those incidents as much as we can as a result of our change management practice. So when I think of good change management, I look at these three areas here. We want to make sure that we're establishing appropriate authorization and approval for the change. And appropriate, again, I'm tying that back to risk. So if this is going to be a fairly big or significant change, we want to make sure that we have senior management in IT as well as on the business involved in authorizing that change. And authorization is ensuring that, yeah, we've got funding, we've got resources to support this activity. We see this as a priority for the business to move this change forward. Typically, those would be more. We would have that more involvement more when it's a new service or a significant change to a service. But we want to ensure that, again, we're identifying who needs to be involved up front to actually authorize the allocation of resource, and then who's actually going to provide the approval when we do the final deployment into production. And again, having a good risk matrix or risk model to help determine the impact of the change and what we want to structure it with in terms of authorization level and approval is a really good way of managing that authorization approval steps within the process. Documentation can be onerous, and so what I like to emphasize here is that we want to right-size the amount of documentation. It could be a simple checklist at each of the stages as we go through, but we want to make sure that we're verifying that key activities, key steps have been performed, especially around testing and remediation. So again, these are areas where, from an assessment perspective, where we look at organizations and understand their process. These are sometimes deficiencies where, you know, there's sometimes shortcuts taken, or there's not the documentation to support the appropriate test for that change, or that there's a documented and validated remediation plan that's been put together for that change as well. So these are areas, again, that we don't want too much documentation. It's not a requirement or a need, but we want to make sure that there's appropriate documentation to support the different approval steps and ensure that in the event that there are issues or challenges with the change, that we can back it out, or that we've got a method to correct something as we're doing that deployment. And the last step here is making sure that we're effectively communicating with our stakeholders. So communicating with other IT partners to ensure that they're aware of the scheduling and timing of this change, and communicating with our business partners to ensure that they understand what, if anything, is going to impact them on a Monday or a Tuesday when this change has been rolled out. So is it something that's just in the back end, which is going to be transparent to our customer? That's fine. What type of communication do we need to provide? And tied with this, you know, do we need to provide any sort of training to our support staff in ensuring that they understand what the changes are and what steps they should take in the event that there's any sort of issues being reported after the change has been made? So when you're looking at implementing or improving your process, we're pretty big on the continual service improvement approach. So understanding vision, where you are now, where you want to be, how to get there. This is a topic for another webinar, but it's important to have some sort of a framework to apply your improvements against, or your project against. And this works really well. It's a very simple process, very simple mechanism to follow through. and it can help to focus you in terms of the objective that you're trying to drive through. When we look at some of the baseline information, so trying to understand where you are with your change management process, we evaluate that based on a maturity assessment. So we look at trying to understand what the overall maturity is of your change management process in this context. And the ratings basically go from non-existent up to optimized. So you could have a maturity rating of anywhere from 0, which means, you know, nothing exists, you're not even thinking about this process, all the way up to optimized, which means there's lots of integration, there's automation embedded within it, business is fully engaged in that process. And typically, getting to that optimized level is not the goal of most organizations. Ideally, when we set targets for organizations to track towards for a process that's under improvement or is being first implemented, we want to try and get them to the defined level, which is ideally you know, making sure that the process is documented, it's well understood, we've communicated it, it's been rolled out appropriately across the organization. We've got measures in place to measure the effectiveness of that process. So typically when we're setting targets around process maturity, we're trying to make sure that an organization is working towards a defined level. If you can get the majority of your core processes to defined, then you might start looking at specific process areas to move to more of a managed level, which is going to, again, see some better metrics, better automation, some stronger integration with other practices, other processes within your environment. So when we're setting targets, defined is really what you should be looking at from a maturity model perspective, and this is based on a CMMI model. So many of you might be familiar with measuring maturity in this context.
And Matt, based on what you see when we do these assessments, where do the typical benchmarks come in at? I hear ratings anywhere usually from about 0.5 up to about a 2. It's not too often that we see organizations come in at that 3 level, is it?
No, you know, and surprisingly, Brian, you're segueing into my next slide perfectly.
I have a good habit of doing that, don't I?
Yeah, that's good. It's like you've rehearsed.
It's like that. If only.
So when we look at what I've done here in terms of this, the first point on this slide, this is looking at our Pinkscan data benchmark over the last 5 years or so. And if you look at that time frame, the average for change management is only 1.93. So we're still not seeing across the industries that we've done this assessment against, even to the repeatable level of process maturity. So change management, which is fundamental in every organization, and every organization is practicing change management to one degree or another. We're not seeing good levels of maturity getting to that sort of managed or optimized level of maturity in most of the organizations that we assess. And this varies even by industry. I can tell you just quickly, the highest industry rating for change management is in media at 2.19. Services, pharmaceuticals is 2.12. Financial services, 2.07. So there are, by some industries, you're seeing sort of more of that repeatable level. And quite often that's indicative of maybe a good change control practice that those organizations are looking at. But what when we're looking at from a best practice perspective, we're applying that full life cycle of change management. And that's often where there's a difference in terms of a gap between what we would see from a change control evaluation versus the full change management process. So some of the common areas when we look at the change management survey in Pinkscan, the sort of 5 points here are common areas where scores are typically much lower. So one of the lower areas is around having a fairly robust measurement framework for your change management process. So defining critical success factors, key performance indicators, ensuring that we're producing reports on the process in a timely and repeatable fashion. So that's one common area where that's impacting that overall maturity score. Ensuring that there's an oversight role, so just general roles and responsibilities to support key steps within the change management process is another area where we're seeing lower results. Communication plans to support change management, pre-authorized changes, what we refer to as standard changes as well. Again, based on risk, do we need to go through the full change management process, or is this something that's very repeatable that can go through a standard change or a pre-approved process to minimize some of the volume? And this is a big area that organizations struggle with, is giving up some of that control to manage and monitor a higher volume of pre-approved changes. If there's one area that might be beneficial for any organization to focus on, it would be really to try to make sure that you're looking at creating models for standard change and having an appropriate practice within change management to authorize and monitor those standard changes within your organization. So those are some common areas where we're seeing gaps in a change management process, and that sort of influences the maturity rating that we see in terms of our benchmark data. I'm going to turn things over to Brian.
Thank you, Matt. So I bet you're all wondering, how can Pink Elephant help you with your change management process? And there are many ways that we can help you. First of all, I would love Matt to confirm that he can see my screen.
I cannot.
You cannot see my screen. This could be interesting. Let me... Well, this might just be audio then, because I am not technically savvy. I'm a sales guy, so bear with me here. But yes, many ways that you can use Pink Elephant to help you with your change management process or your ITSM program in general. We're a training and consulting organization. And now we are going to talk about a service called PinkATLAS. And PinkATLAS is actually a suite of services. And let me see if I can, I'm going to try to share my screen now. It looks like it's going to let me. No, I haven't mastered this yet.
Oh, something's happening, Brian.
Hey, there we go.
You go.
There we go. I actually figured that out. I'm quite impressed. So PinkATLAS is a suite of services, and we're going to do a little tour of what you get here. At its heart, it's hundreds and hundreds of downloadable templates, artifacts for your ITSM program and all your ITIL processes as well. This is a homepage. Now, PinkATLAS is available in 3 tiers, and what we're going to see is available in each one, and then I can talk about some of the bells and whistles that come along with the different options available. So one area that people love is called Ask the Expert, and what you do is you log in anybody from your organization, and you can say, hey, this is what I want to talk about. Is it change management? Maybe it's something else. It can be anything IT service management related. And hey, maybe you've got a document you want to upload. You're going to send in your question, and it goes to the smart people that work here, like Matt. And Matt sometimes can answer these questions right away. Sometimes he'll set up a phone call with you. Sometimes it might need someone smarter than Matt. I know that's hard to believe, but maybe your question is so specific it needs to go to one of our consultants with a very specific skill set. That might take a couple of days for us to get back to you. But regardless, you can use this portal as often as you'd like. The next area that people get a kick out of is these browsable ITIL books. Now, if you've got an ITIL program going on, you've probably got some hard copies kicking around, but it's always handy to have these in browsable format right at your fingertips. Just log in and you can start thumbing through them. Now, if you do want to get additional copies through the stationery office, use that link and you get 50% off. Those are pretty expensive books, so that's a few bucks of savings there. This now is all of our downloadable content. So there's a whole section on your IT service management program. It's not specific to a particular process. You can see the type of file it comes in, little heading, what it's all about. So, hey, here's a downloadable ITIL overview. Just boom, take that and share it around your staff. But you can see there's a lot of stuff here. And then there's a whole section on organizational change, lean, how to apply lean concepts. This is the org change. Whole area on governance, asset management. But just because I'm looking at the time here, I think we want to show you change management because that's what you're all here for. So change management looks like this. Ta-da, table of contents. Got all your kickoff decks, your project charters up there. Here's your core documents, and we're going to take a quick boo at those ones there. All the process flows come in Visio. And then where it kind of differs for each process is in all the supplemental material. So you can see all down here what is available for change management. A lot of stuff because as Matt's been talking about, this has been a vital core process since the inception of ITIL. Every business has been doing this. So just to give you some context, something like, say, let's take a look at transition, planning, and support. There won't be that much there. Not a lot of organizations are applying that. Service validation and testing, again, just the core documents are. So back to change. And let's take a look at some of these documents. So the first one we're going to see is the overview. And the overview is all about the benefits and the scope of this process, but also the roles and responsibilities. So this gives you an idea of how all the documents are laid out. The blue text is obviously areas where we figure you're going to want to make edits. That being said, when you download these documents, they become yours and they're fully editable. I once said they were editable, and they may be, but they are editable.
Brian?
Yes.
It's just a gray screen. I don't think the document's sharing.
Well, that's not good. So that is not good. And let me see if I can get this now. How's that?
There we go.
There we go. I wonder if that'll stay the course for all of these documents. But yeah, so now you can see how the documents are laid out and the blue text I was talking about. And let's go down to the roles and responsibilities. We're going to talk about the process owner, process manager, and the analysts. There we go. So let's see if when I switch screens here now, I want to look at How's that, Matt? Is that showing the detailed design now?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Awesome. So detailed design. Detailed design now, we're going to show you the process flow that you may have seen from the ITIL book. Racy. And my eyes are going to start crossing soon because this document is huge. It's probably almost 100 pages. So it's got a step-by-step process flow going on here. You can see the level of detail. The detailed design document actually goes deeper than the ITIL books go. And this is, I don't know, well over 20 years of PinkATLAS experience going into this type of document.
Yeah, so each of these documents was developed based on the initial ITIL principles, but then based on some of our experience and what we've seen in terms of implementation, they've been tailored and adjusted. The detailed document really goes into a lot more detail than most organizations would necessarily apply, but it's very scalable in terms of how you would apply it within your organization through your review. So all of the Visio documents are included as a separate file, so you can make adjustments to the actual process flow and then tie them back to individual activities within the process in your design document.
And Matt earlier was talking about a common challenge being measurements and reports, and this document can definitely help with that, who gets what from where and how often it would define your KPIs and CSFs, probably more than you need. So we always know you might find yourself cutting some. So we always say if you download the document, keep the original somewhere safe because you never know when you might need to revert back to it. But you can see the type of detail it goes into. And then I do want to show very quickly one more document here. And it's the high-level design. And I probably should have shown this to you second. This has got the process flow from the ITIL book at the outset there, and I think Matt had that in his presentation. And then it starts talking about all the policies that you should have and all the integration, how it integrates with all the other ITIL processes. A lot of policies, again, probably more than you're going to need, but we've tried to identify them all. How does COBIT come into play? So I am watching the time, and I hope we're not going over too much for everyone here. But I do want to just, give a high-level overview of the three options available. And let me see. I'm going to try sharing this now. Matt, can you see the three different PinkATLAS options on my screen?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. All right, so PinkATLAS is available in what's called silver, gold, platinum, and those prices along the top are in US dollars. If there's people out there who are outside of the United States who are interested in this service, you can let us know, and we can tell you what it is in your currency. So again, in each is the browsable books, the Ask the Expert, all the downloadable content. Here's where it starts to differ a little bit. User licenses is basically, that's the number of people that you can have poking around PinkATLAS at the same time. So they are named, and there you go, 1, 2, or 3. Pink Elephant is a training provider. Hopefully most of you know that. So with these, you get a certain number of self-paced training courses. It can be anything out of our self-paced training portfolio. And we also provide virtual instructor-led training through WebEx, and in Gold and Platinum, you can see you either get 5 or 10. There's one caveat with these training courses is that the exams are extra. So you would call into our CRM department to purchase those. We are also a consulting company, and hopefully most of you know that. So with the Gold and Platinum, you can see you get a certain number of hours or even days. So you can use those hours 1 at a time, 2 at a time, or if you've got a project going and you'd like to use a full day or 2 days with one of our resources, we book that. If you'd like them on site, you just pay the travel cost. Matt was talking about Pinkscan and an assessment. Now, Pink Elephant can do consultant-led assessments, or you can use our do-it-yourself tool called Pinkscan Online. And in the Platinum version, you get access to that. You do your assessments, as many as you want throughout the year, and you get a nice report generated, basically showing you this is where you're at. If you feel comfortable analyzing those results and identifying the improvements to be made, more power to you. If you would want to use Pink Elephant for that type of support, we can definitely help you with that as well. And then, of course, in both Gold and Platinum, you get a 10% discount on training fees. So if you wanted to bring us to your location to deliver any type of training course, and events for our annual ITSM conference in Vegas, or perhaps our leadership forum in August, you would get a discount on that as well. So that kind of gives you an overview of 3 different options. Matt, I'm kind of done here, so I don't know how to throw the baton back over to your way.
I'll just steal it.
You got it?
Yep.
Perfect. So I hope that kind of gives you a good idea as to not only how Pink Elephant can help you out with change management, maybe gives you some ideas for how you can even start tackling the improvements on your end. So, Matt, how would you like to finish up?
Yeah, so hopefully this has been insightful to you and of some benefit. I want to address some of the questions that came through. A few came through, and so I'll try to catch those. Hope I won't miss any. So slide deck will be made available, as well as the recording of this presentation, and that will be sent out to everybody that's been registered, that was registered to it. There was a question around the access to the maturity assessment, the statements, and I'm quite happy to send that out to all of the registered attendees as well, so that you've got that. There was a question about will Atlas be updated to ITIL 4, and that's absolutely something that's in the works. So as we have more information and we start to analyze and understand what additional content or what we want to build out in terms of additions to PinkATLAS, it will absolutely be updated to reflect that new content.
And I think it's fair to say that there's some dependency on Axelos for that, as well as they're in the process of still publishing the advanced ITIL 4 books.
Yeah, so with the foundation book that's coming out, there may not be, so a lot of the content may already be covered from what we already have in Atlas. There may be some adjustments that we would make to existing templates, but some of the advanced books, as Brian's indicating, as those start to release, that's probably going to drive a more significant change in Atlas than the initial book. But certainly in terms of how we've got a current ITIL overview for version 3 in the program area of PinkATLAS, putting in a new overview for ITIL 4, that would certainly be something that we would work on providing as an early release into PinkATLAS once we're able to start sharing that content with our customers. And then, let's see. So there was a question about the specific documents that we've shared today. Would we make those available to attendees? And what I suggest is if there's a specific document, if you're looking at purchasing, I would reach out to Brian with a request if there's a specific document or something that might help you in terms of better evaluating PinkATLAS, then certainly we would look at helping support you in that area.
For $10,000, you can have it all.
Brian, there's a question around ITIL training and certification. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I didn't actually see the question, so I'm not quite sure of the specifics around it.
It's just, can you talk about ITIL 4 training and certification?
Well, yes, I can. So ITIL 4 Foundation should be going live mid-February. It's going to be 2 days, and it's going to be really a focus on the service value chain model, which is how Axelos is modernizing the framework. The idea of the foundation class is to really answer the question of why ITIL, and that seems to be resonating with people so that they can really get proper buy-in for understanding why the framework is needed and what it can do for them. Now, that's a little bit different from the current version, which is still very relevant and it's got great content, but the current version is really focusing on answering the question, what is ITIL? So the difference there seems to be, again, really be resonating with organizations who are planning for this. Again, not going live until mid-February. I think I maybe saw a question pop up saying 2 days. So yes, the ITIL 4 course, the foundation course, will be 2 days, and that's a change to the current version is 3 days.
So with another question on ITIL new version, does it cover DevOps? So there's more references to DevOps, but it's not diving deeply into DevOps based on what we've seen so far. But once the content becomes fully available, then we'll have a better understanding. But it's not going to cover at least at the foundation level. Likely not to go into too significant amount of detail around DevOps. You're still probably better off looking at a sole sort of DevOps training program to support that sort of learning. And another question that came through was in terms of talk about SOX versus non-SOX changes. We do in the detailed design have an area where we call out COBIT controls, and those are documented as well in the high-level overview. We're trying to make sure that there's an understanding of where those controls are necessary and tie into specific steps where you want to ensure that level of governance is included in your change management process. So it's really dependent on your industry. And we track that sort of control for SOX or non-compliance or non-SOX changes in the detailed design document. So as that's being built out, we're defining what the control is and what we need to have in place, and be able to articulate what needs to be justified or demonstrated to auditors that are looking at that requirement. If there's a more detailed answer that I can provide, then happy to have a conversation with you about that offline. You can reach out to me. I think I just included Brian's email address here, but Brian can get you in touch with me.
I'd be happy to.
So in the last question that just came in, do we provide free access to industry-wide baseline metrics? For example, what would be considered the norm % for standard changes? So we don't measure at that level. So we have a baseline measure in terms of the overall maturity of the process. The statement level, where I've indicated in the earlier part of the presentation common areas where we see lower, that's based on sort of manually pulling that. We've not invested a lot in doing some analysis to provide more of a paper, but maybe that's something that we ought to look at in terms of using some of the benchmark data that's available to us to do more research papers. So I can certainly take that back. The benchmark data that I've shared is not something that we typically publicize. So it's something that we include in our Pinkscan reports to our customers so that they have a view or a perspective of their maturity compared to everybody that's been assessed in our database and everybody in their particular industry. But it's not something that we've published. I think the last paper that we published that looked at industry maturity was 2011, 2012.
I think you're right. I think I've still got that kicking around somewhere.
Yeah. I think I've got all the questions.
It sounds like we might be done here, and if we are, I want to express my gratitude and say thanks, for attending, and I hope you did find it valuable, and for putting up with my little technical gaffes there. But I'll be honest with you, I think it went a lot smoother than I thought it was going to. So appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks very much for attending and spending some time with us this afternoon. And again, if you've got any questions following the session, then please reach out to, you've got Brian's contact information. We'd be happy to chat with you in the next few days.
Thanks again, folks. Take care.